You won't believe who's here. It's audio snobs again. They're all here. Paul, Marcellus, Tim, Chris. And oh boy, they brought a drum kit with them. What are we going to do? Talk about it. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about mixing drums, drum kits, program drums. Let's do it. Guys, shall we go drum kits first? Program drums?
Why not?
Why not which? Which one, guys? What do you fancy?
Well, because there's two different subjects. I mean, I'll talk about either one of them, really.
Okay.
Because, I mean, everything's come on such a way from, you know, where it used to be, where, you know, we started sampling drums and triggering drum sounds and stuff like that and building tracks.
Absolutely.
Through machines kind of thing. And now it's sort of taken on a whole new wave because I would say 10 years ago, a lot of the sounds weren't that great.
The samples,
yeah, samples and things like that. So we stumbled a bit there, and I mean, I kind of lost the vibe around that sort of time. And things have come back. I mean, things are a lot better now, and you know, both drum machines and samples and so on. Kick the shit out of everyone, you know, everything that used to be going. I mean, you and I know, Paul, you know what it was like in sort of the mid 80s with drum samples, for example. Ouch.
I know. Hold on a sec, guys. One thought. Actually, I believe the drum machines were better 20 years ago.
The original 8-bit.
I don't think you can. Yeah, I don't think you can beat SP 1200 or MPC Mark II.
Do you know what, Marcellus? I'm going to totally agree with you. I remember when they came up with this. Oh, it's amazing! It's all gone 16-bit. It's so much better. And I immediately
it wasn't, was it?
No, I immediately says no. I prefer the sound of 12-bit out of my Akai S900. Actually. And you and I you just picked up on, I think, that point. Something happened when they went 16-bit on drum samples. It all went tits up, didn't it? Am I allowed to say that live? Just did.
You just did.
I just did. It all went wrong, didn't it? 12-bit drums, 8-bit drums. They got punched. They're solid. Really.
Personally, I can see what Tim's saying in one aspect, but you take the aspect of hip hop, for instance, and these guys, I remember I was in New York in the early 90s.
Yeah.
And you'd obviously bump into people and move around in different circles. And you just end up at people's houses and they had a room lined with vinyl on all four walls and a deck with an MPC in the middle. And they'd just be going through every break and just taking it, you know. And it's like, I think that aspect of vinyl, first of all, and then 12 and such like bits of sound, you know,
just worked.
It just seemed to work for me. It had the boom bap thing going for me. Now boom bap's gone. To me, it's something else. I can see what Tim's saying. So in the same light as opposing what Tim's saying, I'm agreeing.
You know what I'm going to say?
It's about distortion.
Yeah, go on, Chris.
Distortion. Distortion.
Is it though? For me, it's about solid firmness, because drum sounds are to a large degree on the white noise side of things anyway, aren't they? You know, especially snare drums and that, and stuff like that is sort of, if you viewed it as a waveform, it's a next to white noise in its form. No? Yeah.
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah. So. I found 8-bit was a bit too crunchy because it was just missing too much information.
Agreed. Yeah.
12-bit, for me, sounded great. And I was working, we're allowed to drop names on this show, I was working with Eurythmics, and Dave Stewart got me a 16-bit, a Prophet 2000 it was, brand new, the first 16-bit sampler around. And I started resampling all my stuff into that, and immediately I did not like it as much as the 12-bit drums. You remember, Marcellus, you know. something.
Well, that was the classic argument. You had the S900, the S950, and the S1000. I always thought for drums the 950 sounded best.
Better, definitely.
Best, yeah, definitely. So there you go. There's one aspect of drums, and that is maybe they're not linear and they're not, like you said, white noise aspect to drums, the distortion aspect to drums, the various things that make drums really pop. And it's not describable in terms of how good the sampling was or how good the specifications were. You know, it seems to be that drums kind of thrive off this kind of limited bandwidth. You know, I don't know what you guys think.
I agree. How about you guys, Chris?
Yeah, and compression as well, like less dynamic range as well as less bandwidth.
What is good?
Is good, yeah. That's what makes them crack, isn't it? It's like
absolutely, if you know how to use a compressor. Otherwise, you just smudge them. Yeah.
But then back in the day,
as well. Sorry.
Back in the day, you were also dealing with, I'm not going to say compete with, dealing with the input amp on the sampling drum machine you were using.
Yeah,
what was going on there? Who knows what was going on there? Who knows what they did to, you know, maybe distort, as in change the sound, as in shape the sound when it was recorded. I don't know.
And also with a lot of hip hop, the stereo bus from the MPC was pretty hard to beat. On an SSL, on a Neve, on anything else. I can't tell you how many times we brought up the MPC as a stereo, tried to better it and couldn't, and just went with the stereo from the MPC. And there was something about that compression.
It had a sound.
Did you do that thing, Marcellus? A lot of engineers did this. Instead of putting the MPC into the line inputs of the board, you put them into the mic inputs.
Mic inputs,
Everybody seemed to do that to crank.
Which was easier to do with Mark II, whereas the Mark III had more output, and the 3000 MPC 3000 was more full bandwidth. I think it was 16-bit, Paul, wasn't it?
I jettisoned the whole stuff by
that kind of stuff.
Some people younger than me will say the 3000 was the best, but
a lot of people use the 1200 and the 3000. A lot of the New York producers, you know,
1200. I've used the MPC 60, and I messed around with other people's MPCs later than the 60. The 60 just had it for me, just had the sound. You know, I didn't think it. Like, this is what we're agreeing here, isn't it? It didn't need to be poshed up. It worked. It sounded great.
It was Premier's main machine, so you can't argue with that, you know.
Absolutely. I even did it. I'm guessing you probably did, Marcellus, but I sampled into an SP1200. And to get that hip hop sound, you actually have to distort the recording going into it. The sound, Did you find that?
Well, distortion, as we talked about last week or the week before, is key to most things.
Precisely.
Yeah.
So then, taking that into, you're talking about the new samples, the new sampling being too clean. So what is the best way to approach that in a mix now then, if that's what you're dealing with? That's what's arrived in the project. It's like nice, clean, 24-bit samples.
Great question.
It's a great question. So go on ahead and answer it, Chris.
Yeah, well, I know what I do. I look for the right kind of distortion straight away for the snare, for the hats, probably. Kick, maybe more likely to mess about with compression, but like some kind of saturation in the mid and high end can give you more that sort of warm, fuzzy feeling, but still with impact.
I hear that. Can I just give you guys a little story here? I mean, on this subject, people do that with live kits, with real kits. I mean, I was working in LA at A&M Studios, and Guns N' Roses were in Studio One at the time. And the assistant on my session said, "Oh, Paul, man, you know, come and check this out. They're recording drums. It's amazing." So I walked in there. First thing I saw was the old Air Montserrat board, completely refurbished and looking absolutely amazing. And walked into the live area, and there's a huge rock band drum kit set up. And they've got in front of the kit, they've got on a chair a didgeridoo facing it, with a pencil mic stuffed in the far end of the didgeridoo, to the left, to 45 degrees each to the left and right in front of the kit are a couple of dustbins with mics inside them, and behind the kit is all these huge aluminium sheets, mic.
Yeah.
And they're introducing noise to a real drum kit, let alone sampled drums. That's my point. And Steve Fitz, Marcellus, I know you know Steve really well.
Class engineer, yeah.
He used to do this thing, which was like an artificial version of what I just described, which was basically, run the whole kit through a beaten up shitty little practice amp or something like that, and mix that in.
Yeah.
So we're talking noise in drums is a good thing.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah,
I tend to distortion wise, I tend to just go for channel strips and stuff like that myself. So I'll decide whether, seeing we're talking about hip hop, for instance, if I was going to try and do a track that was, or mix a track that was like maybe a Jay-Z track, I'd probably most often use a SSL channel strip and something like E series or G series.
E series, surely. I mean,
E series or G series, both.
Because
well, I think they use both quite often. Tribe Called Quest as well, E and G split consoles. Yeah.
Can I just pick up on that, because Tim, you were talking about this in the last episode, and Tim mentioned something really interesting. I don't think we quite noticed what Tim said at the time. Everybody complained about the GEQ when the G came out, so they had to revise it. And like Tim said last week, what they did in the end was gave you a way to flip between E or G on.
Yeah, but that was only in the J series. They did that. They didn't.
They did it in the G. They did it.
G plus.
G plus.
I never saw that. To be honest, I never saw that myself.
I saw the G plus and Tim
okay.
So okay. Yeah. And that was, to be honest, I was working a lot at Olympic at the time.
Yeah.
I remember people like Spike were really, really complaining about the GEQ when it hit.
He doesn't like the G, right?
He got to like it, but I think one of the reasons they modified it to eventually call it the G plus was just to keep people like Spike happy, because they're right. I need my EEQ. What the hell have you done to it?
He had a different distortion. It was much more distortion and likable.
It was rough stuff, really, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was great. It got too aggressive for me, the G series.
Man,
yeah. But for some hip hop, you need that,
I've never heard drums hit as hard as when they're recorded on an E series SSL desk. You can really make them take people's heads off, can't you? The snare drum, make it really.
You can throw in like 15 dB of 7K or something, and it's like, wow, this sounds good.
Go on.
However, the argument I was putting forward originally was, depending on what kind of hip hop I wanted to the record to sound like. If it was going to be more like a puffy sound, I'd probably go for stuff like VR type plugins or 88R type plugins, but also stuff like UAD 610s on the kicks.
The 610, that's so
fun, man. It just thumps, just thumps.
Yeah, round as a pillow.
There's a great tip for the Helios. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it. The Helios EQ.
Yeah.
You just click. You don't have to boost anything. You just click the frequency to 60 hertz, and this is what the desk does. By the way, it puts this ridiculous bottom end on what you're working on, and so the combinations of those kinds of things.
And rather than 60s, the Helios. I mean, they had that bottom end going on back then, and just sorry to interject, Marcellus, but Helios was originally the in-house gear at Olympic in London, right?
That's right, yeah.
That's what it was designed for, and that's where Hendrix, Zeppelin, and all that stuff was made. And the other thing that was used around that time, and I've got to say, there's a brilliant plugin of it, which is just as good as the real thing, is the Pi compressor.
Oh, yeah.
I know you've got a fondness for them, Marcellus.
Oh, fantastic! Yeah, I've forgotten the
drums.
topology. I've forgotten the topology of a pipe, but
I think they're tranny, aren't they?
oh, they trans, yeah.
Pretty sure.
Yeah, amazing distortion, especially on things like toms and full drums. You know,
Great for drums. Yeah.
great for drums. Yeah.
So, Chris, what am I talking about? Tim, Chris. What you've got to add to this, you know, because I mean, for instance, Tim, all of us have, but Tim, you've recorded lots of I would say live kits, real kits, actual drum kits, and loads of programmed drums. I mean, you know, what's your analogy here? When you're recording a real kit, for instance, do you have to treat it differently?
Depends how much work you want to do post. Because that's what everyone does these days. I mean, there was a point, at least when I started, where, you know, because you didn't have samplers then. I mean, you were using like an AMS 1580 or something to do a good drum trigger on, or a Bell BD80, and trying to, you know, sample a good bass drum or a snare drum in there, and then re-trigger them back. Gates and all that sort of shit.
Or 5 AMSs.
Yeah, well, you know, it depends what you're trying to do, kind of thing. And then, as we all know, I mean, it's got to the point where, you know, you don't need a live kit. You can program everything. But at the same time, I'd say it's a different musical style that you're involved with. At that point, kind of thing, or at least you're guaranteed pretty much to be so. I don't know. I would say nowadays, though, of course, you're pretty much going to replace everything on a live kit regardless, and all you're doing is using the actual playing for timing.
This is a great point you're making here. These days, you know, it's Magic Tricks department. It's smoke and daggers, isn't it? We replace, and you know what I like to say and do is augment. Maybe not replace, but augment. Well, hey.
No, I'm not going to disagree with that for a second. It is. I mean, it's complete augmentation, really. I mean,
sound great.
You say, what are you using? What are you hearing? You don't even know, or you wouldn't know anyhow.
On a real kit, let me just ask you guys. I've never heard. Doesn't matter who was engineering, who was playing it. I've never heard a real kick drum on a real kit sound good enough in comparison to what we can do with replacement stroke augmentation.
I don't know, guys. I'm gonna be devil's advocate again. Always seem to be, but for me, depends on the genre. For instance, take gospel music. I think for me, I've always got a great sound on the natural kit rather than try to trigger stuff, because it's not the grace notes in gospel stuff, and the small detail is really important. And when you start augmenting, you can't sample grace notes. And for me, in a real kit, grace notes are a really important part. If you're triggering, you've got to be very careful to me, unless you're doing like genre like rock, where certain types of rock where you need the fundamentals of the kick and the snare, like hip hop, to be very prominent. You know, that's just a thought anyway. I mean, and jazz as well. I've done a lot of jazz as well, and that doesn't bode well for triggering, because you're looking for a natural sound, you know.
Well, you're looking at dynamics, you know, and there's a lot of dynamics in those, and
it's hard to put dynamics on triggers, you know. Let's face it. I mean, you can do it. You can do it with automation.
A lot of work.
Yeah, a lot of work, but sometimes it needs a lot. The track needs a lot of work. I think you've got to really discern whether spending 4 hours extra on the drums is really going to make that much difference to what you're trying to do, you know.
Interesting. I mean, I've got a thing I'm going to say is I find a lot of gospel stuff, and this is not me talking to you, this is me talking about stuff I hear from America. I think there's an awful lot too much top end going on with these drum kits and stuff like that, and they don't sound like a real kit to me. But then maybe I'm being old fashioned, or maybe I'm being a bit of a hip hop head. You know, they sound all sparkly and bright. I mean, we've all heard of a real set of hi-hats, for instance. They don't sound sparkly and bright. Mixing drums, Marcellus, you were talking about the
yeah. I just think it's genre dependent, it's track dependent, what you can and can't do. You know.
Yeah.
And again, it's your taste whether the drums sound natural or unnatural.
Absolutely.
So I'm just illustrating some of the problems I find with triggering, and I was really into triggering when it first started, and I thought it sounded fantastic. But I worked on gospel music for a couple of years, almost exclusively, and came to the conclusion that the triggering thing for that kind of music wasn't as good, and the jazz, because of the grace notes and the natural sound of what you're trying to do. You know, when you trigger something, it sounds great, but it doesn't sound natural to me, you know. And I'm coming from Coltrane and Miles Davis now when I talk like that.
That's a brilliant point, Marcellus, because a well-recorded, well-mixed kit can sound.
Has to be recorded well, Paul.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you notice a lot of great mixers, and you just are one of them, and you just did the same as all these great mixers. Always gave a big up to the recording engineer, because it's in the recording to get a great real kit sound, isn't it?
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah. Otherwise, you're gonna
making the best of a mess.
Yeah, a mess. Exactly. Indeed. Yeah.
But the other thing about not augmenting, or no, maybe this is something you can augment as well. Like, recently most of my recording has been what I call guerrilla recording, like in people's living rooms and just weird places. And what I love is to get a kit down with 1, 2, or 3 mics, just to get a completely unique in the moment sound. Like
where are you putting those mics? Right. Where are you putting those? If you've got 3, where are you putting them?
If I've got 3, well, there's one off axis on the kick drum, near the kick drum.
Nice.
Outside the kick drum, Chris?
Outside, yeah.
Off axis.
Off axis.
Yeah.
Just look like 30 degrees off axis.
Okay. Yeah.
And then I'm feeding one in towards the area between the snare and the hat, like a dynamic, and then a sort of slightly more distant overhead on the other side, away from the hat. And but then you see, if you've only got 3 mics and 2, the kick drum mic you don't really have to play with, you can move them about and get something until it's like, oh yeah, that sounds good, and just stop there, and that's it. And it's like you've got a vibe that way. You don't have beautifully separated this, that, and the other. You've probably got enough to augment the main hits of the kick and the snare, but hopefully you're not going to need to, if you got it right.
Yeah.
This works for me anyway.
I mean, I've got some friends who just recently recorded an album done on 1 mic, which I just sort of laughed at when I first heard the concept, and they said, well, it's all we had.
Right. Yeah.
Exactly. We love playing, and we got a great room. And just find the right place in the room for that 1 microphone. I mean, which sounds absolutely crazy, but that is what,
No, I've done that.
A lot of people are doing still, because maybe that's all they got.
But also then I've done it when I was trying to get the sound of a breakbeat from an old record. Just walk around the room, holding the mic and just using my ear to go, oh, right here sounds great, and put the mic there and recording that. And then, just taking a section and looping it and then adding drums to it.
Mel Sader Pantry has got a great question here, guys. What do you think has made Phil Collins' drums on In the Air Tonight so memorable?
The stone room at Townhouse.
That's a big one. Because that gives it a sound. Yeah.
I've recorded in there. So
Studio 4.
Yeah.
Downstairs.
Yeah.
And it's a stone room. Absolutely. It's only a really small.
Yeah. No, it's not. It's not a big, but it's tall. It's quite high. I mean, it's like 2 stories high, kind of thing. But it's quite a tight space.
Yeah.
And I suppose that all adds to it.
Yeah.
And Hugh Padgham, right?
Well, thank you. Because Padgham changed the sound of drums in the 1980s, didn't he? He first did it with Peter Gabriel, didn't he? And it was Phil Collins on drums.
Yeah.
And then that sound. Now, can we talk through how Hugh Padgham got that iconic drum sound, please, guys?
SSL.
And
SSL compressor.
And SSL gates.
Yes. Yeah.
It's a gated drum sound, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Anybody want to take the lead and explain? Because those drums are explosive, aren't they? Absolutely. That tom fill is probably the most memorable tom fill ever.
Yeah, I actually saw the master half inch for the mix of In the Air, because I was working at the studio and our job was to copy the master. And you know, there's the drum fill that goes do-do-do-do-do-do-do. There's an edit on every tom hit. I don't know what they were doing, but there's an edit on the half inch on every tom hit. And this, of course, is before automation.
Yeah.
What weren't the drums on that on what do you call it, a Roland? What was the early drum machine that they had?
You're talking about the CompuRhythm.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, CR16 CompuRhythm.
Oh, the intro is, but not the tom fills, right? That's that's his drums, isn't it?
That's his concert toms.
Yeah.
They are concert toms, which means the bottom heads are taken off.
Right.
So instead of going boom, 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 they go boom, boom, boom.
Right.
They don't ring out so much. So that's concert toms. So you can get the mics right up inside the toms as well, and that's part of the concert tom. That was the sound of the 80s drum sound, wasn't it? Concert toms. You had to take the bottom heads off your kit if you didn't use concert toms. And then when he played them, Hugh Padgham got this huge sound, didn't he? And it was gated reverb that he applied to them, right?
And gated far overheads as well. So you had near overheads. You had near overheads. Another classic thing in the 80s was near overheads and far overheads, Neros and Pharaohs. So the Neros would be like over the kit, and the far overheads would be like maybe 5-10 meters away from the kit in a big room. So if you gated that and pushed it up for the toms, boom, there you go. That's that sound. That's
that sound, Melsader Pantry. I think it's more than that, though. Is it the emotional impact of the drums on that tune? I mean, that is, I would have to say, the most memorable tom fill of the time, isn't it? And it's so huge. And Phil Collins famously says that he hits drums really, really, really hard. And it's just, I think it's like you've been lulled into this gentle little tune, really sad little tune, and you don't expect them when they come, and just these thunderous toms come out of kind of nowhere.
Again, you hit the nail on the head there. The drummer, right?
Yeah.
When a drummer hits the drum a certain way, when he snaps his wrist and the stick just goes snap, you know, it's like that produces a volume. For instance, a friend of mine was in the Average White Band, and they recorded in New York at Atlantic Studios. And they were working with Arif Mardin. And they went to see him, and he was doing Aretha track, and Bernard Purdie was playing the drums.
How much?
And he said he went into the studio to say hi to him, and he said he opened the door and had to close it and leave because the drums were so loud. But he couldn't take the volume of the drums, you know. So when a guy hits the drums sound twice as good, you know, first of all.
And you need a good kit as well. The better the kit, the better they'll sound. It's kind of, it all adds up. You know?
And that thing of removing the bottom heads of the tom-toms and the kick drum, remember, that had never happened before the late 70s. That changed the sound of drums because it made them much more powerful sounding as well, because you can get the mics right inside. Agreed?
Yeah.
Sure.
So,
absolutely.
So I think, that to me, the sounds of that drum sound with the heads removed off the front of the kick, off the bottoms of the toms, that was like, in the jazz world, that was CTI Records, that was Creed Taylor and Rudy Van Gelder, using that approach to a drum sound. That was in the rock world a bit later. That was Hugh Padgham with Peter Gabriel. And
just remember that Ringo and what's his face, the Beatles producer at the time, had to write to the head of EMI Studios to allow them to have a microphone for the bass drum less than 4 feet away from the bass drum. They were afraid they were going to damage the bass drum if it was any closer. And so they had to get written permission to actually do that and start to give at least music at that time a bit of a beat, as they say.
That's quite funny.
Very funny, very funny.
So, but times have changed.
Okay, so we've got NYC. I hope I pronounced your name properly. What's everyone's approach to mixing sampled drums compared to live drums with compression and equalization, for example, please? Thanks for the question. NYC.
Okay, well, I'll kick off. I mean, it depends what it's a sample of. I mean, it depends whether it's a clean sample where someone's, just tried to capture all the frequencies without doing any processing on it, or whether it's something that's got a bit of punch in it already. But we were talking earlier about sampling into the SP12 and MPC 60 gave it punch, and the output bus of the was it the MPC 60 you were saying, Marcellus?
Yeah, MPC 60 was the first MPC.
So the starting point with clean sounds, I would say,
compression and equalization.
To do that, is to sort of fake up that kind of extra processing that was going on those machines. So I'd say before compression and equalization, some distortion, maybe like tape saturation, as if it was going to tape hot, something like that, to bring out character.
So this is your difference in approach to mixing real or program drums regarding compression and equalization, yeah?
Sure, I suppose I'm thinking this, well, depends how the real drums are recorded. If they're recorded really clean, then
I get it.
Still be doing that same thing, adding the saturation.
How about you, Tim? Oh, sorry, I don't want to cut you off, Chris.
No, go.
Tim?
No, I mean, once again, I go back to what Chris was saying, that in actual fact, it all really begins with what the drums are trying to do in the song they're trying to do it in. That kind of dictates where you're going to go from there, kind of thing.
Good point.
Because you're not going to do sort of the same thing to a big rock drum track as you would to, as you say, a nice piece of gospel or something like that, or jazz, which is very much about dynamics. And then you get into, as you say, are you using compression and etc. I mean, every story is different, and I'm going to miss through this show. But, you need a different approach depending as to what it is you're doing. It might be a whole album of the same stuff, but then the next thing might be completely different. I mean, you don't know. I mean, I went from, sort of doing rock drums to suddenly doing the program drums for the orb. It's about as far from each other as you can get, but that's what making music's about. You have to be flexible, or you don't have to be, but I think it helps.
Very much.
We've got Future Sound Amsterdam here asking a lovely little question. Anyone got something to say about the Glyn Johns mic technique, 2 overheads and 1 in the bass drum?
Well, I've tried it a few times.
There you go. And
it depends on, you've got to have a good room. You've got to have a good room. There was this little studio. You remember the Roundhouse Studios in Chalk Farm?
Oh, I love Roundhouse. Big live area there. Yeah.
But across the road, there was this little studio that kept changing hands. It was down a kind of passageway between 2 shops.
Yeah, I remember that.
And it was this really crusty little room. It had, when I started using it, I think it was for Heliocentric Whirlpool. We did something.
Was that the other side of Chalk Farm Road?
Yeah, on the opposite side.
I remember it. Yeah, I remember it.
Because that live room
after that, didn't it? Yeah.
That live room was amazing. I did loads of live stuff in there, and basically you could just walk in, put a mic somewhere near what you're recording, walk out, pull it up on the desk, and it sounded nice. It just It was a really lovely room, particularly for drums and percussion. So yeah, I tried that. I tried that there. One mic on the kick drum, two overheads. What was it? 3.5 sticks, drumsticks away from the center of the snare drum, something like that.
Interesting.
It's 2.5,
yeah.
2.5.
Yeah.
2.5 drumsticks. Not far at all. About 3 feet.
Yeah. And my understanding of it was that you put one mic directly above the snare, 2.5 drumsticks. Then you took 2.5 drumsticks towards the floor tom, and had the mic 2.5 sticks over the floor tom. Right.
That's interesting.
That was my understanding of it.
Yeah. No, that's right. Yeah,
or
it's asymmetric.
Asymmetric. Yeah. And the phase, I think
that's for phase, I guess. Yeah.
The phase on that technique is the best phase I've heard for drums. You can have a jazz drummer, rock drummer, funk drummer, anybody, and the phase of those overheads. I'm not as fond of overheads when they're in parallel above the drum kit. It always sounds a bit funny or phasey to me. I don't know.
Unnatural.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know.
Okay, can I just say the Psychonautical Chronicles of Trip Hazard? That's such a brilliant name, isn't it?
Fantastic.
Say that again. The Psychonautical Chronicles of Trip Hazard. Says, what about the SP12? I think Marcellus can answer that one.
The dumbest machine ever.
Horrible to use, yeah.
Yeah, the incredible piece of technology, and also the emulator stuff at that period, emulator 2s, and emulator 3, which the 1200 was based on. The SP12 was a crunchier machine. It was, I'm sure it was 2-bit or something. And that had a bottom end that would just destroy people with, but the 1200 became the machine for the hip hop producers, alongside the 3000, the MPC 3000. So they do their kind of crunchy stuff on the 12, and do their more kind of full bandwidth stuff on the 3000. What else is there to say to it? I don't know. It's a legendary piece of equipment.
Do you think the timing of it was very specific?
The timing was different to the MPC. The swing on it was different to the MPC.
Thanks, Naima.
Yeah. So yeah, for that reason, I think people would use it. It shuffled a different way to the MPC. That's the only way I can describe it. And yeah.
Okay.
It was the machine, I believe.
We have a question here, a wonderful question. What, guys, would be your starting point when mixing drums, and why?
Well, for me, a quick rough balance.
That's a good point. That's a good one. Yeah.
Just to hear all of it, and then start identifying the things that need looking at. Like, there's a track actually that I worked on that was released today, and I was listening to it off Tidal. I was thinking, God, the drums, they sound pretty good. I'm quite pleased with them.
Was this IG Culture?
That's right, yeah.
Give him a big up. IG Culture, his music is on fire, and Chris mixed it. Fabulous.
Well done, Chris.
Sorry, Chris. Yeah, go ahead.
So I brought the project up because I mixed it about this time last year, actually. And I brought the project up, and there's about 10 tracks of drums, and IG's a pretty demon drum programmer.
He sure is.
But this particular one, it had 3 kick drum samples, all playing the same pattern, and 3 snares playing literally the same hits, and then a couple of extra snare tracks doing in between bits, and 2 hi-hat tracks, and that was it. Oh, and a conga track. And there was remarkably little processing on any of it, because the sounds he'd chosen, just the way they worked together, was already so good when you bring it up. But I think there was a compressor on the whole drum bus, 1176, no EQ on the drum bus, little bits of EQ here and there on the samples, and then balancing them.
Just make them punch a bit. Can I just interject, Chris, and say what I think you're talking about here is really quite interesting, which is a very modern approach to drumming, which I've used and a lot of people use with samples, whereas it's sort of a collage thing, isn't it? you know, for instance, the three kick drums kind of work together. They don't get in each other's way. One gives it a bit of weight down here. Another one gives it a bit of poke. Another one gives it some body. You know what I'm saying? And you sort of, if you take one of them out of the picture, you're very aware that you don't have the whole picture of that kick drum anymore. And it's a very modern approach.
Yeah. But I also think it's important not to just immediately dive in and start adding compressors and EQ on everything. You know, the less you do, well, in this particular case, that I did not a lot, and it punches, like, because of the sounds used and the way you put it together.
Combination of the different snares, right?
Yeah. Put some distortion on the hi-hat then. Definitely.
As you do.
As I always do.
Tim Marcellus, come on. What do you start with, and why?
Tim? I'll go.
It depends what I'm faced with.
Right.
Anytime in the next half hour.
Yeah. No.
Marcellus, go.
Okay. As Chris rightly put it, start with the balance always.
Okay.
Because you don't know what you're trying to do otherwise. I don't think I make any distinctions on whether it's a programmed drum kit or a live drum kit. At that moment, I just think kick, snare, hat, first of all. Probably in that order as well.
First, because to me, I tend to start with a kick, because that's the foundations of the track, isn't it?
It's your anchor.
The whole track kind of sits on the kick drum, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
And then kick, hat, and snare. That's fundamentally what's going on with your drums, isn't it?
Kick, hat, snare, and then if it's a live drum kit, I will always, well, not always, but 90%. Strip silence to the fills, so in between the fills there's no bleed through.
Yeah.
And then I'll
even remove room mics, ambient mics, if they're not well recorded in a really nice room. It's just a bunch of information I don't want to clutter the picture. Like you're taking out the room on the tom mics when the toms aren't actually playing. It's the same principle, isn't it? Removing a lot of mess, a lot of dirt, just to get some more clarity on the picture.
Yeah. And that is exactly what I do next, Paul. After getting a great kick, snare, hat sound, the toms then are fundamentally easy to place because you just put them where you want them. I won't EQ them, but what I'll do is I'll spend an inordinate amount of time getting the overheads to sound good.
Yeah.
You know, if it's a real drum kit.
Do you tend to, I definitely sort of low cut or high pass, should we say, on those mics, because get rid of some of that rumbly, messy stuff.
Yeah, even band pass, you know. But in general, I'll be working on how the phase of it sounds. You know, and there's some great plugins. Little Labs do a plugin that adjusts phase between stereo, and if you've got a bad phase,
who does that?
Little Labs, they're called LIL Labs.
Little Labs, fantastic. That's a really nice little.
And UAD have got it on a sample as well, so you can literally change the phase of the two microphones.
I do this, you see, and I'm not the only one to do this. It's like sometimes you just do it in your DAW. And that started off in Pro Tools, and I think other DAW users got into the flow of this, and you literally zoom in so tight you can see the attacks of the drums, and you manually move them around to get them tight and to deal with phase issues.
Absolutely. And then another trick that I use a lot is I'll take both sides of the overhead, smash them through a compressor and bring them up in the middle just a little bit. You know,
I like that. I like that. You're talking about parallel compression here.
Parallel compression, but the summing into mono as well.
Summing. So the
so you take the two overheads into a compressor.
Yes.
Off a bus and bring it right up the middle.
Why are you summoning it into mono? I know
because,
a lot of people will be asking
if you've got sure, if you've got any phase issues, then monoing it will show you your phase issue. You can then compress that and make it more solid in the middle.
See, some of us are geniuses, people.
Well, I learned that from geniuses.
That is so brilliant. That's a good one. Yeah, it's a really good one. How about you guys, Tim and Chris?
I've just been thinking about that. I mean, as you were saying about drum kit, for example. I mean, problem for it always really starts with the quality of the drummer, because I mean, I've worked with a drummer who was the drummer, he shall remain nameless, but in
don't let him remind
very, very big band. And
by the way, Big and Serious says up the Gooners. Yay. Sorry. Go on, Tim.
But basically, you know, I had this old drum kit set up. It was a nice big kit and all the rest of it. And we went in to play it, and we sort of closed all the doors and so on. And me and the producer sat at the desk, and he starts playing, and we're sort of looking at each other, and both got up at the same time and walked back in, opened the doors to the live area, and stood in front of him, sort of going, "Can I hear anything? Can you hit something a little bit harder, please?" And there he was. I mean, his technique was fantastic, but there was no power in the drums.
That's a very old, back to the 40s, 50s, 60s. They never really used to hit the things hard, did they?
Exactly. I mean, this was a young kid, so, you know, you wouldn't have thought he was affected by the 60s, but all the same. And then, of course, you get the other end of things where, you know, you sort of do, you know, your sort of Iron Maiden drum kit thing, and have somebody who bashes through his skin so hard. I mean, literally changes all the skins on the drum kit every morning.
Broken heads live on stage, broken drum heads. I mean, it happens. Even kick drum heads.
Yeah. But I mean, it just goes back to the dynamics of the drummer or the person actually playing a drum kit, for example. And variations between, you know, one drummer and the next. They're not all, I mean, it's why, in a sense, drum machines came to be, because they were reliable and they hit the same every time, and you could be pretty much guaranteed, and you didn't have to worry.
You're talking about studio drummers, the difference between session drummers, studio drummers, and guys who probably wouldn't make it so reliably in the studio here.
Well, not necessarily, as I say. I mean, that's a personal judgment as to what you think about how people perform. Some people perform great and some people don't, and especially sort of, we did a lot of, you know, sort of first albums for an artist, and therefore, I mean, you understand that they're probably a little bit nervous. And that's why you're sort of staying there. Please hit the damn things. It's a drum kit, for God's sake, you know. But everyone's different, kind of thing.
Can I give you, because somebody did ask, sorry, I can't remember who it was that asked, but it was brilliant, asking about Glyn Johns and stuff. There's a brilliant Glyn Johns story, which is one of the best studio drummers ever, a guy called Dave Mattox. Check out some of his work, absolutely incredible drummer. Was talking anecdotally about the first time he ever worked with Glyn Johns. And he said he played the drums, he went into the control room to listen, and he sort of listened to the drums, and he went over to Glyn Johns and he said, yeah, Glyn, I think maybe the ride cymbal could be a bit louder. So Glyn Johns said to him, well, hit it harder then. That's a relevant anecdote.
Especially if you only got 3 mics.
Well, absolutely. We've got some more questions coming in. So, all right, MYC is back and saying, I really hope I'm pronouncing your name right. Anyway, if it hasn't been discussed or asked, how do you add excitement to program drums that usually lack excitement? Brilliant. Distortion, envelope manipulation via compression, attack release.
All of the above. All of the above.
Number B.
All of the above.
Whichever one of those works. But yes, for sure, you need to inject something by doing something. So all of those. Also, have you any of you used that SPL transient?
Yeah, tons.
Sure,
there are quite a few transient shapes.
Transient designer,
perfect for drums. I think the Native Instruments one, Transient Master, is brilliant. There's a brand new one I'm using a real lot, which is called Impulse. is it called Impulse? Damn, it's from a company called Surreal Machines, and it's 3-band. And
Nice.
transient shaping.
Okay.
So you've got high, mid, and low frequencies that you can adjust separately. Absolutely brilliant. It's called Impact. It's from Surreal Machines, and to me, that's the sort of the natural progression of transient shapers. And I think transient shapers really are the best way to add extra excitement to program drums and real drums, actually.
On that note, also, any compressor with a slow attack and a fast release.
That's really true, because you don't want to miss the actual smack of the.
So the stick goes through, and then the drum hits the compressor.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
You get that movement with the drum, you know? Yeah.
Compressors, transient shapers, but reverbs. I mean, you have to add reverbs to program drums as well, right? I mean, they sound.
You know me, Paul. You know me. I'm
like
so
reverb.
Dry when it comes to reverb.
Fair enough.
That's just me.
I mean, there's reverb as an effect, obviously, where you get that big bridge over troubled water sound. But just for enhancement, I use a little bit short reverb, little short room, maybe heavily, like the top cut off really heavily, possibly. Maybe a tiny bit of pre-delay, so you get a little bit of slapback on a tiny bit, you know.
It's pretty sexy.
Reverb it doesn't work on under 1 second, I think, would be my thing.
Sorry, under 1 second, you say?
A reverb time under 1 second, yeah.
Oh yeah, I'm talking about like 300 milliseconds.
Yeah, I'm being devil's advocate.
Do you guys EQ your reverbs? Well, I know, Chris, you just said you take a bit of top off sometimes. I mean, I tend to do a lot of, with program drums, I do a lot of EQing on reverbs. For instance, if it's a hi-hat sample, I'll actually make a bright reverb for that hi-hat to give the impression of metal reverberating around a room, you know, and the opposite with a kick drum, I'll wind top end out of a kick drum reverb to make a nice boomy sort of reverb. But this is program drums, which do need a lot of special attention, don't they, Tim?
Sure.
Yeah, I would agree. It's, as you say, it's like trying to make something that's not entirely natural sound somewhat natural, because that's kind of what your ears expect. And it's a balance, and you know, dangerous one. You can go horribly wrong, but at the same time, you can go horribly right. You know, it's
what do you guys use for type of reverb, like non-lin, room, plate, hall? What's your favorite?
I tend to use rooms mainly.
Rooms, yeah, chambers.
I'm the same as you guys. We go back and we have been in rooms, live areas of studios, and heard drums in those rooms. It might be a small room, it might be a booth within a room, it might be a big room, and we've stood close to the drum kit or a little bit away from it or a long way away from it. And I think we're all very experienced at what a natural reverb would sound like on a given drum, an individual part of a drum kit, for instance, in a given room. And I think what I tend to do is just use my memory experience of being in rooms with drums and try and recreate proximities and general room sounds. How about
you? Well, I think what I love about the sort of program drum sounds is when you're recording live drums and you're in a proper big room, you've often got other musicians there, and no matter how much you try, you'll never totally get rid of the spill.
Yeah.
And with program drums, no spill.
Yeah.
And so you get a clean sound from the start, and you can get on with things from there.
Is that good or bad though?
Yeah, I mean, personally, I think it's good, because I say, you know, I think you should be able to move on as well. And to be honest, if you have to do too much, you didn't record the right sound in the first place. But that's my personal take on things.
Brilliant.
Other people will, you know, use 16 drum, you know, bass drum sounds to create a bass drum. It's cool. It's whatever works, you know, whatever you need.
We've got a couple more questions, folks, because we're going to have to wrap up really soon. It's been almost an hour already. Okay, so Naima says, what are the main differences when mixing different drum frequencies, EQs, e.g., snares, kicks? Yeah, so what are the main differences when mixing different drum frequencies,
Well, and differences between what?
Between the snare, the hat,
I see.
toms.
I would say to start with, each drum is basically designed not to interfere with the other drum particularly much. So
what we tend to do is keep them out of each other's frequencies.
Well, they do it naturally,
don't we? They do naturally quite well. Yeah, actually, yeah. So yeah. So we focus, I guess the answer is we focus on the fundamental frequencies of each sound, don't we? We want to project to even emphasize the fundamental frequencies that make a particular drum that particular drum.
Yeah. I think fundamentals on a kick for me would be 20 to 80 hertz.
That is serious. Boom.
And secondary would be 1K to 4K. So pedal, the pedal.
Yeah, the pedal, the beater hitting the head.
Click. And in between, you either scoop it out or put it in,
Okay, that's brilliant.
Snare drum, 200 at the bottom and 5K at the top. Two fundamentals.
Nice and exact stuff. We've got one for Big and Serious here. And the question is, what's your go-to drum machine for programming in Logic? I'll answer that one. Because it's certainly not the one that comes with Logic. I think by far the best software plugin for drums is Battery by Native Instruments. It's far and above better than any of the others, to be really honest with you. Sonically, I've obviously got experienced ears, but I can hear if someone's used Battery or not. It sounds that much better than any others. It's brilliant to work with, really, really quick, intuitive, drag and drop samples onto it, etc. Loads of, it's even got like expressions in it. You can make an individual drum hit kind of go, and this kind of stuff. It's fantastic.
Modeled on MPC as well.
Well, it's modelled on it. Absolutely, it is modelled on an MPC. All right, look, we're kind of there, folks. So, anything to wrap up with, guys, individually? Anything you'd just like to say?
I'm going to say one more thing on mixing drums because it is like really
huge subject. We'll be back.
We
will be back on this one. Go on, Chris.
The snare drum. It's to me the snare drum where it sits in the mix is so important. It's like it's the vocal against the snare. Everything measured against the snare. The snare's got to have that right, correct weight against everything else.
I hear that. It's the backbeat. Ever since who was the drummer? Who was the drummer back in the day for Little Richard and all that? And he was the first drummer ever. Earl Young. Earl Young was the first drummer ever to play the snare. Consistently, and that created modern drumming, the backbeat. So the snare is incredibly, incredibly important. Yeah. Okay.
Summing up one story. I worked with Jeff Porcaro once. Recorded an album with him. And they rehearsed it in the studio. Went to record, and he took off all his cymbals.
Oh wow!
Played the track without cymbals, and while everybody came in to listen to it. He put the cymbals on. I recorded the cymbal tracks, and he played the cymbals as everybody was listening to it. There you go.
Fabulous. Look, thank you so much for coming, everybody. Really hope that we've been of use to you and that you've enjoyed the show. Thanks so much for coming. We'll be back every week. And for now, we've been Audio Snobs. Thank you very much, and see you again.